House of the Dragon was my favorite TV show of 2022. I can't remember the last water cooler show that had me watching episodes the day they aired during my lunch break on my damn phone so I wouldn't be spoiled or fall behind in the conversation, getting together to buzz excitedly about it to my colleagues and guess what was going to happen in the next episode. Oh wait, I do remember the last one of those. It was Game of Thrones. The feeling of relief that this franchise is back on track cannot be matched. In the wake of so many series ending up deep in mediocrity and the impending death of prestige television as we know it, House of the Dragon emerged to be a towering success, featuring everything I loved about Game of Thrones and the Song of Ice and Fire books. I remember back when Game of Thrones first aired, and there was a joke about how you'd pitch the show to various people in your life. You know, you'd tell your girlfriend that it has doggos in it. Initially, at least. You'd tell your guy friends that it has so many tits in it. You'd tell your nerdy friends that it has dragons in it. And you'd tell your parents that it actually has excellent writing and performances and nothing else is of interest to me. It got me thinking about what I might say to recommend House of the Dragon. I could talk about how it features some of the best execution of world design I've ever seen, from the costumes to the sets, to the makeup, to the practical and digital effects. The music, as everyone predicted, given Ramin Djawadi was at the helm, was incredible. It has some of the most gorgeous and evocative cinematography I've ever seen, Sapochnik's trademark darkness and all. The writing is an analyst's dream, achieving that rare goal of sounding completely natural and believable, whilst also being saturated with cohesive themes, metaphors, and foreshadowing that enhance the text. And the acting. Dear Lord, the acting. The show moved me to tears on more than one occasion. A fucking fantasy show about dragons and medieval politics had me crying over it. In particular, Paddy Considine, Emma Darcy, and Olivia Cooke deserve all the praise and trinkets the world has to give. And yes, there's fucking dragons in it, and one of them has a really long neck, and I love him. Bar a few questionable decisions that may or may not pay off in future seasons, the show is damn near perfect. But that isn't how I would actually describe the show. It's all true, but it wouldn't give it credit for what I think it excels in beyond all else in its class. If I had to sum up what I actually think the show does so well in a sentence, I would describe it as a show of meaningful looks. So what do I mean by that? Well, I don't mean their outfits, although fire, honestly, nothing but flames at this wedding. Call the damn fire department. No, I mean looks as in physical looks characters shoot at one another, the way their outlook sculpts their interpretations of the story's events, and the way the idea of perceiving and being perceived permeates the entire show. That all probably sounded like a lot, so let's take it in stages. The dialogue throughout is delicious and worthy of its own video, but I'm pretty sure you could watch this without hearing any of the dialogue or reading any subtitles and still get a general sense of the beats of each scene, as well as the overall plot and a full understanding of each character's personality. For some sweet and simple ones, take Gerald's look when he underestimates the game Rhea's hunting, and she says she doesn't want company. Like, yep, that's Rhea, telling you that this is standard for her. Or Jason's douchey fucking sneer when Rhaenyra and Laenor greet each other at the wedding, for pure comic relief.
What a twat!
Things like the single look Harwin and Laenor share in the entire show conveys their whole dynamic. Most looks go deeper than all of this though. To say there's a strong element of ambiguity throughout the show is a bit of an understatement. You could read half the looks in more than one way. How about this bit at Emma and Balon's funeral when Rhaenyra falters saying Dracarys and looks to Viserys? I've got two ways of thinking about this. On the one hand, I see it as Rhaenyra caught up in her grief, then turning to Viserys and seeing him lost in his own. With Daemon's nudging, she feels that he needs her to step up in this moment, and she rallies herself for him. On the other hand, I see her looking to her father for support and guidance in her time of grief, then seeing that she won't receive it and finding her own inner strength. I think it's the second one, personally, but both are justified by the story. She embraces the responsibility of being heir because she thought it was her duty, even though she never wanted it.
I don't want it.
And she grows to rely on her own power and value because Viserys becomes distant and neglectful. Either way, it fucking rocks. Or take a gander at Laena and Vhagar, and I can't believe I'm about to talk about the look a dragon gives, but it's so touching the way Vhagar initially refuses to kill Laena and seems to either want to comfort her or simply express sadness at having to do this. Then the shared understanding between the two of them, and finally the flat-eyed violence as Vhagar prepares to breathe fire. That's how in-depth we're going on this thing, so there's no time time for talking about minor characters. Let's look instead specifically at Daemon and Viserys to start with. I'll use those two not only because the first season is basically all about the reign of Viserys, and Daemon is simply the biggest character in the show, like he's always the most, but also because they function as great foils for one another. Daemon's early actions, the creepy uncle shtick and the police brutality, speak very loudly as to his nature, but his reaction to everybody else's reaction to his fuckery says so much more about the deeper aspects of his identity. As everybody assembles for a small council meeting that's been called so that he can be reprimanded for the aforementioned police brutality, he sits there watching them all walk in with this unbelievably shit-eating smirk. Oh great, you might think, he'll be the unrelenting psychopath of this series. I thought we were all out of those. But this is elevated in context, because through similar situations we'll learn that this is the smirking of a child, hiding his pain at having not been recognized by his brother, and it becomes almost too pitiful to be intimidating. Daemon often smiles inappropriately, especially when he's angered by people he doesn't respect or think of as a threat to him, or when he's too proud to admit that he's been hurt by someone. Take him looking into the crowd before his joust with Gawain Hightower at the tourney, specifically searching for Otto and smiling at him before he wrecks Gawain by means of questionable honor. This is blatant revenge for Otto opposing him at court and pushing Viserys to do the same. He doesn't care how obvious it is that he's fucking with someone. He's desperately striving to be the one closest to his brother and not that cunt Otto Hightower. And if he doesn't get his way, he is going to stir some shit. Later in that same tourney, when Daemon loses to Coral and yields, he smiles up at him with this fixed-on rictus grin, hiding his humiliation at having been beaten by some randomer no less. That smile slips away as soon as Capricorn looks elsewhere. It's not so much a look, but take his little giggle at Laena's funeral when Vaemond starts banging on about the relative viscosity of different people's blood, functioning both as a dismissal of Vaemond's puffed-up self-importance and a tacit defense of Rhaenyra's honor by literally laughing at the man who's attempting to intimidate and threaten her. Or in one notable example, when Viserys says,
"Daemon has ambition, yes, but not for the throne."
And Daemon smirks at the line. He knows Viserys is a weak ruler who doesn't have a mind built for deceit and political machinations, so the laugh seems to be feelings of superiority towards his brother. But previous instances have shown us that Daemon smiling usually means he's fucking fuming. Recontextualized, the smirk becomes his bitterness at how far he perceives the Targaryen house to have fallen under Viserys' rule, and/or consternation that Viserys doesn't view him as a challenger for the throne. Fake smiles are a trait the two brothers actually share, though for different reasons. Given all of the, how would you describe it, Viserys?
Fucking politicking!
Yeah, given all of that in the show, you have a lot of people being very polite to one another whilst hating their guts and doing all they can to destroy them. As the king, Viserys is in the rare position where he doesn't really need to pretend in front of people. No one would dare challenge him openly, especially with all the dragons swooping around, and if he were a bit firmer with his subjects, they'd probably shut up about the whole queen who never was shit as well. But Viserys, if you were being generous to him, is just a nice guy. If you were being less generous, you'd call him weak.
You're weak, Viserys.
Yeah, just like that. So when people have the cojones to sass him or point out the disrespect, he doesn't react with his honest opinion. He does a fake little smile. Targaryen through and through. All throughout the marriage proposal scene with Corlys and Rhaenys, he throws up these little gritted teeth smiles every time they insinuate that Daemon killed Rhea, or they push for more concessions when he fully understands how humiliating this is. One of my favorites is when Jason shows up at the wedding and asks where Alicent is. How out of control his family is happens to be a sore point for Viserys, but all he does is give him that pain smile. It probably gives people the wrong impression of him in other ways, like how when Jason tells his dumb little sexist joke and Viserys gives him a pity smile. He can't complain, he's a bit of a jokester himself, but Jason, who isn't the brightest lad, and last time he tried to have a chat with Viserys got absolutely roasted, reacts like he just heard his dad tell him he loved him for the first time. He's like, "Vizzy liked my joke, holy shit, what do I do? Should I tell another one? Somebody pinch me." In a more serious example, take Emma's death. When Viserys tells her they're going to bring the baby out, he gives her a little smile, likely thinking that it will comfort Emma, but it's this weak, half-hearted smile, and he can barely hold it for more more than a second, because he knows that this is wrong and he knows she'll die from this. But he's possessed by his dream of a son and believes that this is the price that must be paid. Back to Damon now, and sometimes he smiles just because he's a complete shitheel who's constantly up to no good. Not only do you have the absolute cheek of turning up to Rhaenyra's wedding in the first place, after being banished like twice and thought by Viserys to have had sex with Rhaenyra, in the wake of his own wife's death no less, but he turns up to the wedding grinning his ass off, not a care in the world. I could make a video-filling montage out of creepy uncle looks alone, but the 4th episode absolutely takes the piss with his pervy little smiles at Rhaenyra. Everyone is so awkward at Rhaenyra's presence, and Daemon's just like, let me get right in the middle of this, I think I can make it worse. After all, Daemon is constantly looking for a fight, either to witness or to participate in. There's how amused he looks, again, the day of his wife's funeral, as the family tears itself apart after Aemond loses his eye. Maybe he knows what an amazing anime villain he'll become because of this, and eagerly awaiting the day they face off. Then there's how clearly ready he is for shit to escalate when Vaemond starts going off again about the succession. Daemon's, oh yeah, now you're gonna get it, face when Rhaenyra shows up on Cyrax, and how much of a pouty little bitch he is when Rhaenyra shuts all that shit down. Viserys, of course, will avoid conflict at almost all costs, even to the point where he'll let other people he fundamentally disagrees with walk right over him. When someone says something that outrages him, he's far more likely to just stare back at them, like at Otto when he says,
"The gods have yet to make a man who lacks the patience for absolute power, your grace."
Rather than confront the implication that his own brother would try and overthrow him, he just stares at him like, did you actually just say that, you fuck? But says nothing to refute him. He does the same thing later with a different Hightower, this time Alicent when she starts going off at him about Rhaenyra and her kids. At first he looks at her like, is she really gonna start some shit? And when she raises her voice at him, he does actually escalate to an, oh no she didn't, but that's the furthest he goes. This is the touchiest subject for him, questioning the legitimacy of Rhaenyra's children, to the point where he threatens harsh punishments on his own family for doing so, and he doesn't do more than give Alicent a stern look here. The fact that her reaction is more one of frustration than fear tells you all about how impactful these stern looks actually are. Family is Viserys' biggest weakness for this kind of limp-wristed admonishment. He will always express some kind of dissatisfaction when they rebel against him and his wishes, but he very, very rarely confronts them directly, usually only once it's too late. Take his expression of annoyance and disappointment at seeing Rhaenyra back from her tour early and clearly unbetrothed. He throws Rhaenyra a couple of glares and sasses her about tapestries, but it takes Alicent to communicate in open and honest words why he's so upset. God, he's such a man.
Mine own father does not know the language of girls either.
He's got his happy moments, like when he's ripping this bird to shreds, like were they actively trying to make me think of Denethor? But Viserys spends much of Rhaenyra's wedding annoyed. He looks about ready to throw hands when he sees Daemon again, especially without an invite, but it's a wedding, he's family, we'll let it go. Then we see him take a look at Alicent's empty chair. He's annoyed that she's late to such an important occasion, and this is especially notable because Alicent takes a huge amount of pride in performing her duties, so he's no doubt perplexed by what might have caused this lapse of decorum. For our last example, take Viserys' response to Daemon's line,
Seems they've been especially cruel to you.
At first, he's offended and gives his trademark polite smile in place of anger. Then he seems to take it in the way a brother might intend it, especially from a brother like Daemon, just brutally honest. Daemon is full of these reserved, ambiguous looks throughout the wake. Just as the audience is figuring out whether this older Daemon has changed and actually gives a shit about anyone, his family is doing the same. Rhaenyra catches his eye and they both smile at each other, gently but still smiling. Rhaenyra's is shy, uneasy. It's been about 10 years since she last saw him after all, but Daemon's is fond, reflective, and undoubtedly tinged with sadness. Is he genuinely pleased to see his niece, someone close to him, here in his hour of grief? Is he so irreverent that he's reminiscing on their fucked up history and failing to fully hide an all-out smile? Is it his inappropriate reactions flaring up, seeing his long-lost niece evoking feelings he's not capable of hiding? That wouldn't be an isolated incident. Daemon is constantly trying to mask his true emotions, and usually chooses to hide them behind amusement and irreverence.
To choose violence here is to declare war against your king.
Wonderful.
But on more than one occasion, he's so emotional that the mask slips away. Daemon's initial reaction to Viserys' letter promising aid carries the hallmarks of all his usual defense mechanisms, putting on a face of amusement and a lack of concern. But the thought of being pitied by his brother is too much for Daemon, and the look very quickly falls off his face. Perceiving pity seems to be the one thing that never fails to send him over the edge. Over a decade later, when Viserys offers him a place at court after Laena's death with a very poor choice of words, Daemon can barely contain all of the emotions rising up from this injury to his pride. All the anger and humiliation and sadness. He wants Viserys to want him at his side for his own sake and his own value, not as a pity offering, and so he leaves to seek solitude or comfort, just as he always did with Mysaria all those years ago. More than simply pity, it's the lack of power and control that pity implies which angers him as well. In that scene where he's eavesdropping on the small council, contrast his earlier smirking reaction with his unmasked fury at Otto calling him a second Maegor. He despises Otto for driving the two brothers apart and vying for his own house's power at the cost of the Targaryens, and more so, he hates that Viserys is falling for it. Out of sight, where he doesn't need to put on a show for anyone, Daemon glares at Otto with pure venom. Or take Visenya's birth, when that one Kingsguard, I'm told his name is Laurent Marbrand, but who fucking cares, suggests going to see Rhaenyra in the Maester. The look Daemon gives him is so intense, it chills the bones. You could take that two ways. One being that, like any ADHDer knows, he's so hyper-focused on doing a war that he's pissed off anyone would even think of distracting him from it. But the other reading is that he remembers Laena's death. He remembers how little power and control he had over whether she would live or die on the birthing bed, and he's angry that the guy would even suggest he could do anything about it, because it reminds him of his powerlessness. One parallel I love is the near identical framing and blocking between this reaction and the one when he receives the letter from Viserys. Both depict him doing a kind of Hitchcock stare, predatory, dangerous, and in my opinion, remarkably similar to the dragons. The look he shoots the messenger is absolutely terrifying, and then he goes ahead and actually shoots the messenger. He's so fragile and unhinged that merely the appearance of needing his brother's help sends him into a homicidal, suicidal rage. Come to think of it, that sideways look is Daemon's trademark look of, "You're gonna die tonight, bitch." I always wondered during the scene where Rhaenyra dares him to kill her, if he was actually considering taking her out, or if he was just uncontrollably aroused at the sight of a relative being suicidally reckless. Now, with the context of those other looks, I think he was actually mulling it over. Rhaenyra certainly falters a bit, wondering if she might have fucked up here and misjudged Daemon. And the same thing happens in the last episode when Jace tries to stop Daemon from doing a war. He shoots him the exact same terrifying look, and Jace, the poor fucker, is practically trembling. It's possible he's deliberately trying to intimidate these people, and either has no intention or expectation of killing someone in these scenes. He's no stranger to calculated intimidation, like when he threatens the two Kingsguard on Dragonstone, positioning them physically far below him so they have to look up at him and the immense scale of Caraxes, with Jace stood somewhere in between. Whichever one it is, given the amount of times he's erupted into deadly violence without warning, the receiver of one of Daemon's death stares fully believes that he's capable of doing what he's implying. Sometimes it's an even bigger omen when Daemon looks like he doesn't give a shit at all. When he saunters back in after winning the war in the Stepstones, he walks right up to Harry's sword and looks down at it like, duh, because he knows he's not in any danger whatsoever. Contrast that to the last time Harry drew on him, when Viserys banishes him the first time, and while he absolutely wants to take them all on then and there, he has enough sense to know when he's been beaten and backs off. The first time I watched the show, it made me so uneasy, seeing Daemon so passive, calmly and patiently listening to the Pentoshi dude propose the partnership, and even being open to the idea of making deals for the use of their dragons, as opposed to brazenly exerting his Targaryen firepower. He even seems to genuinely care for Laena and his children. Overruling Laena's opinion in their marriage, yes, but doing so softly. All of this is so unlike the man that was established earlier. I thought this can't be character growth. He has to be in denial or something. And Laena seems to think the same. Naturally, one episode later and he's back to incest and murder. The guy hadn't changed, he just thought he'd lost. Probably the cuntiest thing Daemon does in the whole season is to look disinterested, specifically this moment when he's speaking with Laena, and this is amongst a long list not limited to attacking two separate wives and killing one of them, leaving his daughters alone the morning after their mother dies, trying to fuck his niece, and deliberately getting someone's name wrong to their face.
Dick on.
I think it even goes above mocking Gerald about Rhea's death and claiming Runestone. Laena Velaryon, rider of Vhagar, daughter of the Sea Snake, gives him an impassioned speech about how she wants more from life for herself and her children, and he fucking doesn't respond, goes back to his book, and gives her a look like, oh, you're still here. Fuck, man. And this is Daemon in the nicest period of his life. That's not to say that Daemon is completely lacking in care for his family. The deaths of Laena and his unborn child with her, as well as Visenya's stillbirth, both hit him hard. The blank expression he wears throughout the labor, even while hearing that Laena won't make it, read to me as him masking his emotions once again. But that turns to genuine shock and grief when he sees Vhagar burn her. This is maybe the first time we see Daemon express a sympathetic emotion, and it speaks to the love he had for his family. Then there's the look he shares with Rhaenyra at Visenya's funeral pyre, and it's completely different. They've both been here before. Laena and their unborn child, Emma and Balon, they've both experienced unfathomable loss from childbirth that tore their family apart, and now it's not a shock to them. They just look weary, like this is another of many losses to mourn. Interesting how Daemon's look to Rhaenyra here mirrors Rhaenyra looking to Viserys at Balon's funeral. Now she's the one wrapped up in her own grief, and it's someone else looking to comfort her and be comforted, but doesn't get a response. It's one of the reasons I think he never intended the heir for a day line maliciously. How you read Daemon's reaction when he's summoned to the throne room depends on whether you think Daemon was sincerely lamenting Viserys' loss or callously mocking it. His shiftiness could convey irritation at people spying on him and how he's been misrepresented, no doubt by that fucker Otto, or shock that he's finally being held to task for something that he thought he'd get away with, and beating himself up for his recklessness. I personally lean towards the former, mainly by comparing it to his mannerisms in this scene with a near-identical setup. Otto has reported to Viserys that his spies have seen Daemon do something naughty in a brothel, telling the truth, yes, but misrepresenting events to suit his needs and drive a wedge between the brothers, and now Viserys is confronting Daemon about the incident. Except this time, Daemon is completely unbothered, staring Viserys down and adopting his trademark smiles. He thinks he holds the power here, and he's not afraid to use it. Or perhaps he's learnt from the last time, and knowing that despite being falsely accused, Viserys won't believe him, and his best option is to try and make the most of the situation. Honestly, the fact that there's this many interpretations of the way a single character acts in one scene is part of why I love this show so much. But speaking of the confrontations between Daemon and Viserys, as much as they fight throughout the show, Daemon really does love his brother. I think you get that almost exclusively from the looks he gives him and when talking about him. He's too proud to say it out loud, of course. In the later episodes, when he's calmed down, at least a little bit, and isn't constantly trying to ruin Vizzy's life, there's more room for the two old lads to be tender and caring for each other. When Viserys looks over to check on him during Laena's wake, the look Daemon gives back is a subtle one, just the slightest smile and nod, but it clearly reads to me like an acknowledgement, to say that he's okay and he appreciates the concern. When they speak later, you get that look I mentioned earlier, where he still can't let go of his need for Viserys' uncompromised acceptance. He can't even look his brother in the eye after only a few seconds. He so resents being seen by him as pitiable. We'll talk more about eye contact and avoidance a lot more later on.
We'll talk later.
Daemon is devastated when he sees the condition Viserys is in when they arrive at King's Landing. Again, he can't even look at him, overcome this time with feelings of grief and loss. To him, it's like Viserys is already gone, a walking corpse. This look he and Rhaenyra share says that they both know it's inappropriate to jump straight into business with this man they both love so much and haven't seen in years. But Daemon simply can't bring himself to exchange pleasantries with someone who's barely even here. He always thought of Viserys as weak, but to see him so diminished breaks his heart. That aversion ends the minute Viserys makes his baller entrance to the throne room and stumbles on his way up to the throne. Viserys turns and sees Daemon at his side, this time unblinking, lingering at the throne to make sure he's okay, and possibly stunned that he was even able to get this far. It's this scene where I start crying, by the way, and don't stop until the credits roll.
They have a strong bond. You don't want to know about it here.
The fact that Daemon is also the first to notice Viserys in pain from across the table is so touching, but it's Viserys who takes the cake with looking out for family. I could be here all day cataloging Viserys' concerned looks for his extended family, but the real good shit starts when Rhaenyra leaves court. His wife Alicent is cold to him, his sole trusted advisor Lionel is dead, his estranged brother is on the other side of the narrow sea, and now his daughter and heir Rhaenyra has left him, his last last tie to Emma. All alone, he gazes down at Emma's ring and he cries, feeling the weight of his loss and loneliness, and looks out to see what remains of the castle's residents. Rats. With that feeling of isolation and the awareness of how divided his family is at the forefront of his mind, he spends much of Lena's wake looking around at them. The fact that he and the camera have to turn to look at each of them is just a physical emphasis of how distant they are. At first, he's saddened by the animosity between Rhaenyra and Alicent, then at Daemon's loss. He's still Viserys, so of course he doesn't say anything to try and bring them together, but he does notice and he does worry. He's just a cutie who wants to make sure everyone's okay and come together as a family to support each other in times of strife. He doesn't achieve that dream until the very end, the first time in years that his entire family has been present, and he somehow manages to bring them all together. This is the bit that breaks me. This look. He did it. He finally did it. And he can hardly believe it. Rhaenyra and Alicent aren't bitching at each other. Daemon isn't trying to kill or fuck anyone he shouldn't. Otto Hightower is fucking smiling, and Viserys looks around one last time at the happy family he brought together, knowing he'll leave this world with them loving one another before the pain returns. When news of Viserys' death finally arrives, it hits Daemon so hard. It's one of the only times his expression is one of open, genuine emotion without any pretense or deception. Being Daemon, his grief turns immediately to rage, and he starts looking for something to fight to make himself feel better. And unrelated to the looks, I love how he goes to grab Dark Sister and gets all agitated, unable to stand still. He 100% has ADHD, right? Once he's convinced himself that Viserys was murdered, he takes on this brutal look, throwing threats and accusations at anyone and everything, including Rhaenys. God, he loves shooting messengers, doesn't he? He spends all episode trying to start a fight, until it finally bursts out of him when Rhaenyra brings up Aegon's dream, starting with that classic Daemon glare. It's the ultimate injury he could have received from Viserys, and it comes from beyond the grave, so he can't even confront him about it. Despite the
10 years!
Yes, thank you, Daemon. Despite the decade he spent as Viserys' presumed heir, Viserys clearly never thought of him as worthy enough to tell him the most important secret of their family. As a counterpoint, Viserys could have just been convinced that his dream was true and anticipated the birth of his son, which would render telling Daemon the secret unnecessary. But Daemon doesn't believe in all that dreamer nonsense anyway, because it's not purely love for his brother that drives his reactions. Wrapped up in all of his familial drama is his obsession with Valyria and his notion of Targaryen power. When he's in Pentos, he spends most of his time reading old tomes about Valyria, preferring to immerse himself in their glory days than what he sees as the shameful reign of Viserys. His grooming of Rhaenyra is partly because he recognizes that same fire in her, and as a means of emulating the incesty ways of previous Targaryens. It doesn't matter to Daemon who actually has the title of ruler, so long as the Targaryens present a strong and unified front against anyone who isn't them.
Everyone who isn't us is an enemy.
His opposition to Viserys wasn't because he wanted to be king so badly, it's because he hated seeing his house so perceptibly weak. He never asked Viserys to surrender his throne to him, only to make him hand so he could counteract his brother's perceived weakness. Daemon consistently yields his own power to other Targaryens, embodied in the show through crowns, with him surrendering first his own crown to Viserys, then Viserys' crown to Rhaenyra. His look down at the crown Rick brings to him, yeah, I never remember which one is Eric or Arik, so from here on out they will be referred to as the Ricks. Anyway, when Rick hands it to him, you can definitely read a tinge of the grief he felt at Viserys' death in his look. But this is coming right off the back of the scene where he threatened the other two Kingsguard to teach Jace a lesson that fear is the only way to ensure loyalty. Now, almost immediately afterwards, another Kingsguard has, without prompting and at great risk to himself, sworn fealty to Rhaenyra and delivered her Viserys' crown. He's stunned, and he can hardly believe it or understand it. Of course, he doesn't know that Rick here thinks Aegon is a monster and will probably pledge himself to Dharma over him, but at the end of the day, he chose Rhaenyra. Proud men don't like having to look up, but Daemon of all people cedes his power and bows to Rhaenyra, lowering himself beneath her. The Targaryen family means more to him than any of the individual members. Thus, all of his actions are for the benefit of the family, and they should just shut up and trust him. That's constantly interpreted by others as him stepping over them, and for that you can just look at how he and Viserys refer to the city.
Our city should be safe for all its people.
I agree. I just hope you don't have to maim half of my city to achieve this.
He does this so often that Rhaenyra even looks at Daemon at the start of their first war council to see if he'll take control first, but he doesn't. He respects Targaryen authority when it aligns with his own ideals. Of course, when they don't align, this outlook causes him to come into conflict with the family, particularly with Rhaenyra while they make their war plans. When he declares that he'll fly to treat with Lord Grover without asking Rhaenyra's leave, she clearly reacts and stares him down, a look he returns, seeming not to see anything wrong with what he's just done. That moment when he chokes Rhaenyra could equally be attributed to his frustration with the dreamer side of the Targaryens, and that Rhaenyra seems to have caught Viserys' obsessions.
It's your father talking.
And the fact he goes out to see Vermithor is a way to affirm his belief that brutality, dragons, fire and blood are the real power of his family. Daemon has a kind of religious awe of the dragons. He worships them. The look he has when he approaches Vermithor might be the only time he appears genuinely nervous, speaking to his respect for their power. And then you get these close-up shots of their eyes, the other reflected back at them, and the message is clear. They are one and the same, literally seen eye to eye. Daemon is the dragon, the wrath of old Valyria, and he's unleashing their violence and savagery in the war to come. Look, that's relevant. But look, I get it. What I'm describing here is also called acting, also framing and editing, and I guess direction, but at the core of it, acting. The way someone looks and reacts to their fellow performers is just one of the essential aspects of performance. And if the editing was bad, the show would be lost in a Dan Olsen video essay, not here. So why am I singling the looks out? The way I think about it is like this. As much as the last few seasons of Game of Thrones sucked and spit, not even swallowed, it mostly came down to the writing. Every single other aspect of production was usually the best in class. There was a time when the writing was up to that same standard, if not higher, and I could have made a video just like this for it as well. Season 1 does everything I've talked about so far here, and sometimes more with its looks. Catelyn glaring at Jon, which coupled with all the dialogue like,
Father's watching.
but also,
And your mother.
speaks to their entire relationship. The looks Jaime, Cersei and Tyrion share when they're talking about Bran, revealing that Tyrion already knows about the incest and probably infers that they're responsible for Bran's fall. This isn't to say that the later seasons of Game of Thrones don't have some 10 out of 10 looks in them, but something certainly changed. The music never dipped for 1 second, and if anything, Jawadi's work overshadowed everything else in the production on more than one occasion. Yes, I'm talking about Light of the Seven, can you tell? The visuals in the show only ever improved, with better equipment, better locations, better stunt work, better VFX, basically bigger budgets is what I'm saying. They just kept getting better and better until it suddenly and dramatically dipped for like an hour. And even that was stacked with shots that will stay with me for the rest of my life, even with the context of where all of this leads. If anyone's performance suffered near the end, it was because they were let down by the material.
You are my queen. I don't know what else I can say.
Lena Headey stared out of a window for like 2 seasons straight, but the minute she was given something, anything to do, she didn't just steal the show, she stole it, sold it on the black market, double-crossed the buyer, and stole it again. These actors know what they're doing. But watch some of these clips I definitely haven't cherry-picked because they prove my point better, and tell me if you're gleaning any more information from their non-verbal reactions that helps develop their character. How about this one that opens season 8, focused on Arya's reaction to various characters riding past, a callback to the king's arrival in the first episode of the entire show, practically begging you to consider how much she's changed since then. She missed Jon. She's wary of Sandor. She's got a little crush on Gendry. She's thrilled by soldiers and girl boss dragon riders. So this Arya is exactly the same as the Arya of seasons 1 to 3. She missed Jon. She's wary of Sandor. She's got a little crush on Gendry. And she's thrilled by soldiers and girl boss dragon riders.
Visenya Targaryen was a great warrior.
All of which is incongruous with how much she's experienced throughout the last 7 seasons. As a child, she saw most of her family and friends killed, committed more than a few murders herself, traveled rough for like a year, crossed an ocean and got inducted into a death cult, and met Ed Sheeran. An average day for season 7 Arya was to kill a couple guys, dismember them and cook them into a pie, serve them to their own father before killing him, wearing his face and impersonating him, and then poisoning his entire family. Again, this is all before she's 18. I feel like this should, change her in some ways, and yet this, the first scene in the final season of Game of Thrones, tells us no, she hasn't changed a bit. Compare that to how, over the course of only 9 episodes, we see Alicent go from an anxious, depressed young woman used as a pawn for political ambitions to stepping into her own power and building her own camp, fueled by righteousness and indignation, before her high position gradually crumbles all around her as she grapples with the villains she surrounded herself with and the fear that she might be becoming one of them. Are you starting to see what I mean? How about Bran? Let's see some of the looks he... No, I'm serious, we're doing this. Let's see some of the looks he gives people and see what we can infer. I'm being facetious, of course. It's not inherently wrong that Bran is an emotionless zombie, but god is it vexing that everyone thought this absolute weirdo was the best man to be king. So how about this one Daenerys gives the Red Keep after she hears the bells? Oh yes, what a great one. Look at that face. Even after the innocent populace have surrendered, she cannot forget Miss Sanday's death. She's here to liberate the people of King's Landing, but more than that, she wants revenge on Cersei. So she's gonna head straight for her, and she's gonna burn the Red Keep to the... Oh, no. Yeah, that's not what I read at all. Turns out she's just crazy. Compare that to Rhaenyra, who's been preaching caution the entire time the kingdom is on the precipice of war, held back by the selfless notion that her personal power is secondary to what is good for the realm, and the belief that her opponents the Greens aren't evil people, just people with legitimate grievances that can be resolved peacefully. Until she hears the news that her son has been murdered by that same faction whilst on a diplomatic mission. Now, she'll burn them all, and you know exactly why she'll do it. Again, I don't think this is down to the actors. I think this is a result of different priorities in the production, namely spectacle and hurrying the fuck up so that D&D can make a Star War. The character writing was somewhere on the bottom of the pile, underneath fierce costumes. Characters either didn't change, or they changed drastically and in such opposite ways to their previous arcs that it seemed unbelievable.
Tell me if your precious Brandy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, and children burned to life, would you have done it?
3 weeks later.
I never really cared much for them, innocent or otherwise.
I am not here to be Queen of the Ashes.
My point is that you can't end up with something like House of the Dragons looks without a complete vision being realized through every stage of production. Everything is contributing in some way here. The writers need to conceive of characters and scenes that are reliant on looks to convey information and emotion. The actors need to perform those looks. The set designers need to build the backdrop for the looks. The camera operators need to frame and capture the looks. The editors need to choose when to cut to the looks, how long to show them for, and how to correct the light and color for maximum effect. God, you were so close to perfection. And through it all, the director and the showrunners need to coordinate everything and maintain that cohesive vision. Fucking insane that anything even half good gets made. You take away one element of that. Good writing, well thought out, subtle, compelling writing, and everything falls apart. Enough dunking on thrones though, there's hundreds of hours of people doing that already on YouTube that you can go and check out. Getting back to Hot D, I want to roll with that idea of change, to see how a character's looks can convey how the accumulation of years of experiences changes them. The most stark and dramatic change is, of course, Aemond. He starts out the show as a relatively good kid, dutiful, fairly nice as far as these kids go. It's not hard to be Aegon in a popularity contest, but I look at moments like this where he tries to talk to Jace without even needing to be prompted like the strong lads did. And in spite of slights like the pink dread, he only gives up when Jace doesn't even try and bridge the gap. Things could have gone differently for Aemond, but his defining trait as a child is his discontent with not having a dragon. When he sees Luke getting to do the thing and say the word, he's so envious of him, while Aegon is just in the back like, ooh, death, okay, I'm back in the room. The change in Aemond's manner when he claims Vhagar is intense and instantaneous. Some people have proposed that the bond between dragon and rider can influence personality, and Vhagar's ancient, brutal mind caused Aemond to act the way he does. Personally, I think it's perfectly natural that he would come out the other side with all that swagger. He finally got what he wanted, and not only any dragon, but the largest and most powerful dragon in the world. From that point on, on, he's an absolute fucking creep, immediately noticing the strong boys show up mid-fight with a Kingsguard and looking straight at them unblinking the second that he wins. His little eyeball goes so psychotic when it comes to confrontations with the other boys. I love it so much. He's essentially become a tiny Daemon, sharing his disappointment that people don't rise to violence as much as he does, like when Jace decides to be the bigger man at supper. It's easy to forget that underneath all of that bluster and try-hard supervillain shit, Aemond is still a 16-year-old, and that slips through sometimes. When he hears of Viserys' death, he doesn't do any psycho shit like cackle or start plotting to take out Aegon. He looks devastated, like a kid who just heard his dad is dead. Bit of a through line in Thrones, that. Boys trying to be men who are devastated when their fathers kick the bucket. The older Aemond almost never looks afraid or embarrassed, but the brothel matron who fucked him when he was younger really throws him off. This is the same guy who was absolutely ready to throw hands with Daemon Targaryen. And lastly, despite acting like some kind of boogeyman terrorist for the last 10 minutes, when he loses control and Vhagar kills Luke and Arax, he looks terrified. He never actually wanted this, he just wanted a bit of intimidation and maybe an eyeball if he's lucky.
Give me your eye!
But he went too far and he knows he's fucked up. Aemond was bullied, traumatized, and abused at a young age, and in response he went out and took control of immense power so that he'd never be a victim again, which of course immediately went to his head. The tragedy is that the power didn't help him grow up at all. He's still a child, with the same sensitivities and tendency for reckless mistakes. Aemond is a whole ass thing unto himself that we could go into more detail on easily, but when I think of the way a character's looks chart their growth over the entire 20 or so years of the series, I can't think of any better character to do that with than Alicent. Alicent's arc in the series is really less of an arc and more of a circle. All of her looks throughout chart the course of someone who begins in one position and escapes it, only to find herself right back where she started, except now all the furniture is different. As a child, Alicent is a churning whirlpool of anxiety in practically every scene. Looks alone don't do justice to how every element of her performance is screaming out how uncomfortable she is. When she's speaking to Otto and realizing what he's asking her to do, she looks like she wants to cry and refuse, but holds it in, because Alicent's been raised to believe in duty above all else, and suppress her personal wants and needs. Then when she does speak to Viserys, she looks like a rabbit in headlights, notably only calming down when she offers her condolences to Viserys, replaced with steady, unblinking sincerity. Much as she despises the position she's in, she does like and empathize with the man. But despise it she does. That extends to resentment towards Otto for forcing her there. She becomes noticeably more uncomfortable when Otto walks in on their little lunch date, then gives him the coldest stare when Viserys leaves. She sees exactly what he's planning for them with these little chats and lines and gifts, and she fucking hates it. But she still goes along with it. The only salve to her discomfort at this age is Rhaenyra. I love this moment so much, where Alicent is anxiously biting her nails and Rhaenyra reaches out to make her stop. Then Alicent gives her this look that only best friends and longtime partners give each other, when nothing at all is seeming to be conveyed because there is nothing to be said, nothing to be communicated. It's a deep, intrinsic knowledge of each other and gratitude for that understanding, which is what makes it so heartbreaking when Viserys announces his wish to marry Alicent, and the two girls share wordless looks. Rhaenyra feeling betrayed in a very unique way. Her closest friend has been secretly fostering a relationship with her father and is now essentially replacing her mother, who died less than 6 months ago. And Alicent, poor fucker, unable to refuse any of this, is left to look at her like, please don't hate me, I'm so sorry. I said wordless looks earlier, specifically because their lack of dialogue emphasizes that neither of them had a say in this. Rhaenyra gave her blessing for Viserys to remarry, but never imagined that it could be Alicent, and literally no one asked Alicent if she wanted any of this, and they're all ignoring the very obvious signs that she doesn't. It honestly breaks me to see Alicent so helpless. All of this to say, Alicent's main trouble is being controlled and exploited by the men around her, much to her frustration and misery. At first she doesn't fight it, because again, she's been raised to think that this is her noble duty. As she settles into her position as a piece on Otto's chessboard and Viserys' new means to a son, she appears less fidgetingly anxious and instead prone to stare off into the middle distance. Take this moment where she stops and stares midway through standing as Otto outlines his plans to install Aegon as heir and the implied expectation that she supports him in this. Or how she goes full Vietnam when Rhaenyra carelessly describes her life as an endless prison. She doesn't want this life, and while she may obey the rules of society, she'll escape in her mind at all costs. As well as being politically exploited, the young Alicent is sexually severely exploited, as is common among highborn women in this world. She looks so depressed by the thought of fucking Viserys, and during the act, she resorts to staring off at the ceiling and dissociating. She might think of him as a good man and care for him in a manner, but she has zero passion for Viserys. But as his wife, she's expected to sleep with him and give him heirs, so she goes along with it. Just as Viserys is fairly analogous to Robert, Alicent is probably most often and easily compared to Cersei, a queen mother in a loveless marriage who ruthlessly usurps the throne for the sake of her children. The similarities between these two confrontations really hammers that home, but it's also worth comparing her to Daenerys, both married off by family members scheming to ascend the throne, dissociating hard in sex scenes. As the product of this marriage she never wanted, and all that sex she didn't want to have, she finds it really hard to love her children. After Aegon is born, she looks like she wants to be anywhere else but here, doing anything else but this. This leads to what I call the dissociate and bounce combo, which comes up repeatedly.
More than anything, I just want this moment to end.
Along with her personal reasons, perhaps Alicent's lack of love for her children stems from osmosis of Viserys and Otto's outlook on children as a means to an end. Why care for them as individuals when they're clearly just tools to train and pair up to repeat the whole cycle and keep everyone from killing each other? By the time of her villain era, Alicent still doesn't give a shit about her kids, but is keenly aware of her duty, so she sits there while Helena goes on about millipedes, drawing on all her reserves of mum patience. Interestingly, you can compare that to Rhaenyra doing the same with her own children.
That looks like the perfect one.
Helena's aversion to touch, because she's riddled with the tears, confuses Alicent, but she doesn't care to try and comprehend her daughter, she just accepts the gulf between them. There's been no love in any of her prior relationships, so she accepts this as normal. But during her youth, the one thing keeping her tethered, and she shows any joy for, is Rhaenyra, and despite how difficult she makes life for her and her husband, she still appears pleased to have her best friend with her again. Which, of course, comes to a halt when she finds out that Rhaenyra violated all of the social conventions that Alicent has been adhering to all her life, at great cost to her physical and mental health. It's even worse because Rhaenyra lied to her in a way that exploited her weakness, empathy for women who lack agency. You can see on her face that this is something she feels she has to have Rhaenyra's back on. Just as she comforted Viserys by telling him what she wanted to hear when her mother died, she feels compelled to give Rhaenyra the support she likely wanted from her when she was forced into compromising situations by men. Learning that Rhaenyra carelessly flaunted the life that Alicent sacrificed everything to adhere to, and then lied about it to her face, it's just about the worst thing she could have done. The dead-eyed, haughty look she gives Rhaenyra at the wedding as she turns against her. Like, it makes me feel guilty and I didn't even do anything. It's because of this revelation that Alicent enters her villain era, though she sees herself as the hero. I love how her gradual increase in involvement and power in courtly politics and her influence over Viserys is demonstrated by the distance from which she looks in on those politics. At the beginning of her marriage, she's almost constantly kept far away. After Tyland's shut down by Viserys when he keeps bringing up the war in the Stepstones, he and Alicent share a look that I believe signifies their shared experience. They're both ignored by Viserys, pushed aside so that he can focus on how cool it is that he finally has a son. Throughout the hunt, Alicent is kept separate from Viserys, sat with the other women, but she's always watching, ever the attentive wife. She's keeping her eye on Viserys so she can support him, as she does genuinely care about him. But more than that, she's also learning all the intricacies of court and the art of manipulation, as much by how well Otto does it as by how poorly Viserys does. As she starts to lose trust in those closest to her, that distance becomes her choice. When she watches Viserys collapse from the walls of the keep, her face is cold and compassionless. Between Rhaenyra's deceptions and Viserys' dismissal of her father, she's completely out of fucks to give the Targaryens right now. After the time skip, Alicent is right by his side at almost all times. I really like this look where she smiles at Viserys holding Joffrey. On the one hand, she could be genuinely happy at seeing Viserys so jolly, but on the other hand, it could be pitying or vindictive. Like, aw, this guy has no clue, or can't wait for him to say some shit that makes the rest of them uncomfortable.
I do believe he has his father's nose. Don't you?
The Alicent after the time skip has had all of her circumstances reversed. Given Viserys' weakened state and having given him 3 children, it's likely their sexual relationship has ended. Maybe she does a Breaking Bad handjob every now and again, who knows. Her anxiety has been suppressed, no longer flinching when she looks at people. Instead, they're the ones uncomfortable in these scenes. Most importantly, she exerts much greater power over the men around her, shown when she shuts Cagnazzo down and makes him apologize simply by stopping and looking at him. She makes her wants known and people strive to accommodate them, or she makes their lives hell. She believes her wants are morally superior to those of everyone else around her. The thing that makes her stop and look at the Great Pit of Carcoon is his foul language when talking about Rhaenyra.
Every woman is an image of the mother, to be spoken of with reverence. Spoiled cunt.
She believes she's in the right, and Rhaenyra, and everyone else who lets her blatant adultery slide, is in the wrong. Later in the series, when Viserys is bedridden, Alicent literally rules the kingdom with her father. Sat upon the highest seats in the realm, both her high horse and then the Iron Throne. It's a super uncomfortable seating arrangement. The only change that could happen to her is to fall off, or to be dragged down. Over the course of several episodes, Alicent is morally compromised again and again, casting doubt on her belief that she's the pure and virtuous one. Larys is the first to bring her down a peg by having the other Strongs murdered. As Larys pins the deaths on her, what a dickhead by the way, by stating that as his queen he's compelled to deliver on her wishes, you can see her deny it even as she crumbles under the horror of what she's helped to bring about. Their actual deaths are one thing, but it's the affront to her honor, her association with a murderer and kinslayer that stings most. It's not a look, but I can't not point out the other insanely cool visuals in this scene. Like Alicent's hand on her throat as she feels Larys metaphorically tying a noose around her neck. Larys plucking the flower from the bouquet and sniffing it, the very same flower that he compared Alicent to in their first scene together, signifying the control he has over her, with the flower sitting in the palm of his hand, and Alicent starting to pick at her cuticles, just like she did as an anxious child, before stopping herself. God damn, this show is good. Then, desperate and feeling abandoned by each of the men she could previously rely on, as well as still believing herself to be the righteous one, Alicent takes justice into her own hands. Her reaction to Rhaenyra's lying to her,
exhausting, wasn't it? Hiding beneath the cloak of your own righteousness.
It tells us that this cuts Alicent deeper than any of the other affronts, because she knows what she's doing is wrong. Cutting Rhaenyra is something she'll feel guilty about for years after, looking down at the scar during their reunion until Rhaenyra hides it. Then in comes Otto, validating and praising her for this. This, of all things. You can see from Alicent's face that she believes she's in the wrong, and wants to reject Otto's assessment of the situation as an absolute win, but in this vulnerable moment, she take any validation, and particularly her estranged father's. On the return journey, when Larys offers to cut out some eyes in revenge, you can see Alicent's terrified of Larys, but not outright rejecting him signifies that she's lost some of her pretense of purity, or that she feels she has no choice but to keep him by her side. Even as she enjoys the power and security of Hightower rule, you can tell she's uncomfortable with some of the more shady dealings of the Green Squad, like her suspicious look at Otto after hearing the implication that Rhaenyra and Daemon were greeted in a particular way. She still hides behind the pretense of acting righteously and in the best interests of the realm, but you can see that it's much harder for her to make such claims, and she questions the validity of them. Her next step down, and the one that violates her most valued ideals, is caused by her son. And can I say, I love this shot of her looking down at Diana so much. It just reminds me of the Simpsons pathetic meme. Anyway, Alicent's empathy once again conflicts with her sense of duty to family. Just as she empathized with Viserys, but still went with her father's wishes, and just as she empathized with Rhaenyra when she claimed to be forced by Daemon, but still criticized her for placing herself in a situation that could compromise her virtue, she empathizes with Diana over her lack of agency and physical violation, but ultimately protects her family's interests. Her whole face throughout this scene is so incredible. You see all of the turmoil this impossible decision brings about in her, and the shame of now having to intimidate this young girl and potentially fuck up her body with moon tea. She eventually settles back into the emotional disconnection that she tended towards in her youth. Confronting Aegon about it brings no resolution or catharsis. It only serves to confirm how fucked this situation is. Her look at Aegon as he starts to cry that he's tried to be what she and Viserys want him to be hits so hard and says so much. How pathetic she finds Aegon and men like him for excusing their assaults by pleading the hurt that was done to them. Her exhaustion and despair at having fought so hard to liberate herself from control and abuse, only to now find herself actively defending an abuser. This is one of her lowest moments, and she blames Aegon for bringing her down.
You are no son of mine.
You're no son of mine.
Her lack of concern for Aegon's feelings also tells another story. In many ways, she's become just like her father, using her children for political power regardless of their own wants. She's become another cog in the system that exploits women and disposes of them, and protects the men who do the exploiting. Alicent's only means of gaining power in this world was to perpetrate the exploitation herself. The final thing that brings Alicent low is, once again, Larys. This whole scene is a mirror of the evening she and Viserys have sex.
The hour is quite late.
The hour is late, Lord Larys.
In exchange for information, he makes her objectify and humiliate herself. And I'm not sure which she considers worse, choosing to do this for gain, or gaining nothing and having no choice at all. As Larys starts jacking it under his robes, she looks away, the same way she used to in bed with Viserys. So like I said, Alicent's arc is a full circle. She started out anxious, controlled by men, exploited sexually, and beholden to the demands society places on her gender. She discovers her own strength, learns to value herself and assert her wishes, and almost 20 years later, through a combination of bad choices and bad influences, she finds herself right back where she started. One thing about Alicent is, amongst all these people getting jiggy with it left, right, and center, causing trouble over and over again because they keep wanting to fuck the wrong people, she never expresses a desire for anyone herself beyond what you read into her and Rhaenyra's interactions. I wouldn't be surprised if she was asexual. Somebody link me in the comments if anyone in the cast and crew talked about that as a possibility. But outside of Alicent and her distinct lack of desire for Viserys, I mean, just look at how happy she is when she hears he's probably gonna marry Laena. Holy shit. Desire is a major through line in the show, expressing itself in multiple ways. Forbidden desire, both sympathetic and unsympathetic, narrow desire for very specific things, and broad desire for abstract states of being. There's desire in the simplest sense, for another person, probably best shown when the Velaryons show up at the wedding and Laenor and Joffrey start making intense eye contact. The gay emitting from the two of them is so powerful that Rhaenyra shoots Laenor a look, and on the one hand it could just be her realizing that this is who Laenor is in love with, but I also read it to say, Jesus, it's just dick. Like she's thrown by how intense they are with one another. For her, the side piece is just for sex, and I think it's notable that it takes her ages to even glance at Krispy Kreme, demonstrating the difference in how these two value their side pieces. You could write a short dissertation on Aegon's desire for love and acceptance by basically anyone, really. Now, none of the following excuses the truly monstrous things that Aegon does throughout the show, but it does go in some part to explaining why he is the way he is. Based on Alicent's dissociate and bounce maneuver, and the way she is around Helena, I think we can safely assume she probably wasn't the most tender mother. Then you can take a look at the majority of his other interactions with family members.
Aegon!
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 Get up!
Get to bed!
You are the challenge!
Boop. You imbecile.
You are no son of mine.
It would be easy to say, maybe if you want people to stop kicking the shit out of you, Aegon, you could stop jacking it out the window and abusing people. But it seems he literally doesn't understand, well, anything. His face when Alicent's trying to explain the succession crisis to him is just pure white noise, and then sadness at failing to get it. After a lifetime of being told he's a piece of shit, and dedicating himself to being the biggest and best piece of shit, he's given an indication that his parents may actually see some possibility in the distant future that he might one day, if he plays his cards right, be deserving of an iota of love. And the fucker practically bursts into tears. When the crowd embrace him as king, applause and acceptance was the last thing Aegon expected, or deserved. And now he's received it, he's a new man. Presumably. Time will tell. Desire for power is a huge one, as you might imagine for this series. During the coronation, Aemon's desire to be the one being crowned is as plain and obvious as his hatred for Aegon, but the desire for power and physical sexual desire are often intertwined, again as you might imagine for this series. Daemon and Laena making eyes at each other from across the room is partly because they both think the other is hot as fuck, I'm sure, but there's also a mutual respect and lust for the other's power. Laena already demonstrated her desire for power at a young age age by inquiring about Vhagar and then claiming her at the age of 15. Daemon already has Caraxes, so they command two of the most powerful dragons alive, and they both recognize the Valyrian bloodline and spirit in one another, which we've already been over how much Daemon fucking loves. On the darker side of things, you have Larys looking at Alicent's feet. Sure, he could independently like feet, but it seems to be more the power dynamic that arouses him, that it's the Queen's feet that he gets to look at. Add to that a sense of revenge against the world, where everyone looked at his own clubfoot, which prevented him from fulfilling more renowned roles in society. Now he looks at their feet and makes them feel self-conscious. That's what gets him jacking the pink mast. You know what, let's just get all of Larys being a fucking creep by looking at people weirdly out of the way. Yeah, same, Alicent. Anyway, now that's out of the way, we've established that Larys is a creepy sumbitch and we don't need to look at him again for the rest of the video, hopefully. On with the desire. Sometimes the act of looking is used as a metaphor in the dialogue to represent desire. Viserys speaks of Aegon the Conqueror's desire for, well, conquering.
Our histories. They tell us that Aegon looked across the Blackwater from Dragonstone, saw a rich land ripe for the capture.
Speaking to the greed, ambition, and superiority of the Valyrians. In his proposal to Rhaenyra, Kokoro describes what he's seen.
I have deep knowledge of the port at Sunspear, where I've seen the ships of Essos setting sail with their holds full of oranges and cinnamon, and I've always wished to see where they went.
His act of looking is one of desire for freedom and a new life of wonder and love with Rhaenyra, away from Westerosi obligations.
Let us leave it all behind and see the world together.
Sometimes the lack of desire is what's notable about someone's look. I like to compare these two scenes and this absolute gem of a quote from Lionel.
Proud men don't like having to look up.
In that first scene, Lionel is physically positioned as below Viserys, where he should feel envy for Viserys' power, and socially positioned on his small council, where other men vie for control. Yet Lionel consistently demonstrates over the show that he's the most loyal, wise, and honest person in possibly Viserys' entire life. Sure, the Strongs have a vested interest in stability under Targaryen rule, given they owe the existence of their house to OG Aegon, and the two have been bound together since. But it doesn't change the fact that everything Lionel says is true, including how it applies to him. He's not so proud that he wants the throne.
I never wanted it.
Aegon finds himself in a similar position of literally looking up at something he doesn't want. In this case, the throne. Aegon resents that this has been forced on him, and he feels he's unworthy of the job, which is true. More metaphorically, Aegon is down here in the mud, where he's happy with his booze and his child fighting pits and his sexual assault, and he's been asked by Alicent to now hold himself to a higher standard.
I told you I don't want it.
But the strongest through line of looking to express desire is Rhaenyra.
It is larger than you. And your desires.
This first example is going to sound like a bit of a shitpost, but Rhaenyra totally looks at Alicent's butt here. I'm not kidding. Like, on the one hand, it could be Rhaenyra still on a rush from the flight, wondering why anyone wouldn't want to fly, and assessing whether or not she's weird for preferring dragon riding to all the prim ladylike shit that Alicent does. But on the other hand, she could have a huge crush on Alicent and is reeling a bit from her turning down what's essentially a magic carpet ride. In the text of the show at least, they're just very good friends. If we're looking at who Rhaenyra expresses open desire for, unfortunately you gotta look at her uncle. When he shows up at the Red Keep and gives her the necklace, I think it's fair to say that all of the suggestiveness is coming from him. She doesn't seem overly bothered or interested by any of his actions. However Matt Smithy he is, she's like 14 and she's his niece. That's changed by the time of his return from the Stepstones, when she's of age and it's marginally less creepy for HBO to release this. Rhaenyra's look upon seeing Daemon fly in on Caraxes is one of actual desire and admiration, in sharp contrast to the disappointing selection of men Rhaenyra encountered on her tour. Rhaenyra's reaction when Daemon touches the necklace is another one of those looks that can be taken a number of ways. She's a bit thrown that he's just ignored her question. She's a wee bit uncomfortable that he's made creepy uncle eyes at her and then gotten all up in her personal space. She's all fluttery that he's touching her quite intimately thanks to the big old crush she has on him, and trying to hold all of that in so she appears tough and unbothered by Daemon. You get the same reaction again when he notes how much she's matured. That night when she and Daemon go out on the lash is non-stop desire from Rhaenyra's eyes. This is everything she's never seen, cooped up in the safety of the Red Keep. It's life and music and magic and people fucking. Yeah, good luck editing Drew, but also seemingly minor things like dirt and outwardly rude people. She wanders around like she's Harry Potter on Diagon Alley, going, wow, you look at that. Then at the brothel, she's shown all the pleasures of sex, and we see her curiosity and wonder shift into arousal and desire. Once again, not sure how showable this will all be in the edit, but take my word for it. One cool thing is how the patrons and prostitutes are watching Rhaenyra and Daemon as they watch them back, mirroring the people watching Daemon fuck Mysaria back at the beginning. Anyway, this all culminates in her looks towards Crackerjack when she goes back to her room. Having been edged all fucking night, she's intensely focused on him, first flirtatiously and then passionately. We'll get into Caillou's side of things later, don't worry. More than anything, Rhaenyra desires freedom. Initially, she just wanted to fly around and eat cake with Alicent, then it was the freedom to love and marry whoever she pleases, including no one if need be. Her profound reaction to being given her choice of husband by Viserys, that her opinions will be considered, tells you all of that. Rhaenyra frequently has to choose between that freedom and her duty to the realm as outlined by Viserys, and distantly Aegon the Conqueror, and ultimately she most often winds up choosing duty. From her reaction to Crobat's proposal, it looks like she really does consider it and wonder why she doesn't want it, eventually realizing that she values her own position and the good she believes she can do the realm. The point is, Rhaenyra is introduced to power and sex by incredibly bad influences, and this teenager is then somehow expected to show restraint, which is the theme of our next section. The subtlety, or lack of it, in the emotions shown in looks tells you a lot about each character. For instance, Corlys is a pretty cool character who usually maintains composure under pressure. He's not often prone to outward displays of strong emotion, except in the most extreme moments.
Retrieve your patron. How did you let this happen? In my fucking home!
But the minute he gets the sense he's won some power, he's barely able to contain himself. When he believes Viserys will accept his proposal to marry Laena, he's literally doing the Thierry Henry trying not to laugh meme. And when Viserys allows that Rhaenyra and Laenor's children will be called Velaryon, he whips it out again. In the constant muddle of social relationships and politics at King's Landing, someone's ability to hide their true feelings could be the difference between life and death. For the starkest difference between those trained and experienced in this game and those not, you can see how much better Joffrey Lonmouth, aka Ginger Sebastian Stan, is at hiding his secret love than Cracknell is, and how quickly he gets figured out. The restraints placed on women in this society, and the restraint they have to show in turn, is obviously a huge theme in the show, possibly its biggest theme. You get that pretty much immediately in the first episode, not just in the Great Council, but in this conversation between Rhaenyra and Emma. After Emma says that it's their duty to give birth to heirs, even at great risk to their lives, they both stare off with looks of dissatisfaction with their lot as essentially breeders. Emma is resigned to the role, but despite trying to encourage Rhaenyra to acquiesce to it as well, she's still deeply dissatisfied. But the best characters we can use to demonstrate the different levels of restraint on display are Rhaenys and Rhaenyra. These two characters are contrasted very frequently throughout the series, given their shared experience of being contentious female heirs to the throne, and eventually coming into conflict over Rhaenyra's choices. Right at the beginning, when the council passes over Rhaenys for Viserys, essentially the biggest and most public fuck you imaginable, she's forced to show restraint. She's clearly extremely upset, but accepting the result graciously. You can even see a bit of resignation there, and in context you can probably guess that this is Rhaenys giving up on ambition entirely. Not that any of the men in her life who had her back in the council will ever let it go. You might be thinking of Corlys right now, but don't worry, we'll get to him. Boromund's cheeky little
"The queen who never was"
has her reacting like, oh for fuck's sake, and then immediately looking to Viserys to defuse the situation, who of course does his little polite fake smile. Then when Boromund boasts that he's going to win, she throws him a yeah sure thing. When he gets immediately knocked on his ass, Rhaenys doesn't look pleased or upset, just sick of all of this shit. Boromund later stares at Rhaenyra for a while during her swearing in as heir with something close to disgust, and at first it seemed to me like a man resentful at swearing allegiance to a girl, but it's more likely about how his cousin was passed over for being a woman woman, only for the chosen king to name a girl as his heir anyway. Sometimes it's unintentional on the men's part. Take Rhaenys chuckling at the question about the Targaryen dynasty ending because Rhaenyra is a woman. No doubt she's reminded of the council, as she's always reminded of the council. Whatever her feelings on the matter, Rhaenys refuses to get involved in these kinds of squabbles, and part of that is not showing any reaction or favour to anyone beyond the required expectations of politeness. Boromund is her uncle after all, and Viserys is her cousin. Of course, that doesn't mean she no longer feels anything about the council's decision. During Rhaenyra's swearing in as Viserys' heir, she has a little look of consternation, perhaps jealousy that a woman is set to ascend the throne and it's not her. Like, oh, now female heirs are acceptable. Okay. Later, she has another little one when Corlys mentions Rhaenyra being named heir. This could also be mild annoyance that he's listing a female heir in a list of things that are making the realm appear weak. But it's not just resentment towards Rhaenyra, it's fear for her. She knows how opposed many men will be to a queen, and how much danger that puts Rhaenyra in. When she tries to warn Rhaenyra of this danger, she immediately reacts confrontationally, assuming Rhaenys is trying to provoke her. At all of Rhaenyra's little jabs, she maintains a completely blank face. To her, she's just a child who has no awareness that her privilege will one day end, and restrictions will be placed on her. She gives her one final look to impress the seriousness of her point on her. Here would be a good point to switch focus to the young Rhaenyra, because initially, she's relatively poised and controls her emotions when pressured to by others around her. You have that look she shares with Aemma when she expresses discontent with the role of a highborn woman, but also her quiet acceptance of everything she sees and hears in the small council meeting. This is in comparison to her obvious frustration at being immediately shut down the minute she opens her mouth. But she still holds her tongue and gives a sarcastic smile. Wow, she's really her father's daughter. When Viserys starts asking her a seemingly out-of-nowhere question about dragons right after Aemma's death, Rhaenyra is angry and hurt, and expresses as much. But when Viserys insists, she gives him this look that shows she's accepting she won't get emotional comfort right now, and perhaps he's not in the right place to do this, that it's best not to fight the point now, and instead go wherever Vizzy's going with this. 6 months later, and Rhaenyra is still trying to talk to her father, this time to explain her plan of flying to confront Daemon, and is still being shut down without being heard. She's much less happy about acquiescing this time around, but she still remains silent. Rhaenyra becomes more and more brazen as the years go by, and she chafes at the requirements of her station and gender. By the time of her tour to find a husband, the most subtle thing she does is to share this look with Caliban, like, can you actually believe this guy? Which Boromund also echoes. More common is her reaction to the little baby Blackwood kid, like she's not even trying to hide how offended she is at all of this. Although she does find it cute that he gave a good speech despite his age and all the heckling. Like, daw, look at the little shrimp. A great contrast for comparison is how she reacts to Jason and his whole thing. When he, quite forwardly, suggests he build a dragon pit and they get married, she's initially shocked and, based on her confrontation of Vizzy later, fucking fuming. But to Jason's face, she gives a polite smile and excuses herself. Years later, at her wedding to Laenor, where she thinks she's got everything figured out and nothing can go wrong, she gives him the foulest look and literally rolls her eyes when Jason shows up. As she grows older, she also recognizes when she goes too far, but usually only around Viserys and Alicent. As she looks out at high tide, preparing for her betrothal to Laenor, she looks at it nervously and reluctantly, but sticking with it, because she knows she messed up before and made the deal with Viserys to do her duty. Whilst on the hunt, Alicent defends Rhaenyra and pays her a compliment, but Rhaenyra gives her this look that says, bitch, did I ask you? I don't need your protection, because all she can think about is how betrayed she feels by her and Viserys. But later, when Alicent flashes back to Vietnam after Rhaenyra describes her life way too accurately, she immediately expresses guilt and regret. The two are being pulled apart by the demands placed on them by the men in their life, and while Alicent is doing all she can to bridge the gap, Rhaenyra is too impulsive to act in a conscientious way to her friend. Fast forward 10 years of Rhaenyra constantly making risky decisions, culminating in what the world sees as Laenor's murder, followed by Rhaenyra and Daemon's suspiciously sudden wedding, and Rhaenys fucking hates Rhaenyra for her dangerous lack of restraint, for bringing harm to Rhaenys' family, and flaunting everything Rhaenys was denied and would have made better use of. Even before Laenor's death, she's feeling some kind of way about Rhaenyra, given this stop-in-her-tracks look when they run into each other at Laena's wake. After Laenor's death, she won't even try and hide her loathing for Rhaenyra. This look she shoots her when she turns up at King's Landing is devastating. No wonder Rhaenyra immediately looks away. She gives her a whole bunch of other bone-chilling looks up and down throughout the conversation, in spite of Rhaenyra's promises and bargaining. The only thing on her mind right now is Baela and Rhaena, and she considers Rhaenyra a danger to them. Rhaenyra did learn some restraint over the years though. Not enough not to screw Harwin, and not enough to hide her expressions that well, given her little smirk at Tyland being a dick to Beesbury at the small council meeting, but enough to try and approach situations in a more diplomatic manner than she used to, after all of the prior mistakes she's made. The first major fuck-up she realized would be her big night out with Daemon and Cromwell, when she looks at the tea Melos brings her. It's only now hitting her that sex on occasion results in babies. And while neither Game of Thrones or Hot D really get into it, moon tea is seriously dangerous stuff. Next up is her wedding to Laenor, seeing the guy weeping his eyes out over Joffrey's death. Down from the rush of her self-satisfaction, she's brutally confronted with the very human cost and effect that manipulations like theirs have on those unused to playing the game, or those genuinely invested in the abstract notions of honor. And finally, when Alicent rushes her with the dagger in revenge for Aemon's eye and all the other affronts to her sense of decency, there's this shot of Rhaenyra looking at the dagger, silhouetted by flames, visually evoking the prior two scenes about Aegon's song, and reminding her of the great responsibility to the world that was imparted on her, and how badly she's fucked it up so far. Rhaenyra may have messed up seriously badly more than once in her life, but she's learnt from those mistakes, and now approaches life more cautiously, though it's too late in the end. To be honest, both women are pushed to the edge by the Velaryons in their lives neglecting their families, and now's as good a time as any, meaning I wanted to talk about Daemon and Laena and couldn't find anywhere else in the script to segue into it, to talk about the varying power dynamics between couples in the show and how the looks convey them. I'm not talking about Aegon getting distracted and lechy every time he even glimpses a woman in his peripheral vision, and how their avoidance of his gaze tells you about how he's earned a reputation even at this age, although that is a thing. I mean the contrast between a couple like Corlys and Rhaenys, who see each other as equals, even if the rest of their society doesn't. They look to each other for consensus on major decisions for their house, like Viserys' wedding proposal, and Rhaenyra asking what side they'll choose in the war to come. They're actual partners, like Ned and Cat, a rarity in their society. But then you also have Daemon and Laena. As much as their relationship seemed to begin as one of passion, and they do seem to have affection for one another years later, Laena is repeatedly denied and constrained by Daemon. We've already talked about this moment of obscene douchebaggery, but it's persistent throughout the regrettably sole episode we have of the two of them interacting. The first glimpse we see is that touch of the hand and look we went over earlier. Laena is clearly upset at having been shut down by Daemon, but knows now isn't the time or place to confront him about it. Later, when either Baela or Rhaena, I don't actually know, says,
"Father ignores me,"
Laena looks away as if to say, "Yeah bruv, same." For the rest of the episode, up until Laena goes into labor, she tries to drag a serious response out of Daemon, and he refuses to have a conversation with her over and over again. She looks tired but earnest. They genuinely love each other after all, at least I'm assuming so from Daemon's reaction upon seeing her, and the hurt upon Laena's face when he starts getting snippy with her. Daemon may care for her, but he doesn't respect her enough to give the thing she wants the time of day. Laena, Rhaenyra, and Rhaenys are all dragon-riding girl bosses. At their height, the three of them combined could probably conquer the world, but due to the roles and pressures of society, they're consistently subject to the whims of their male partners, and they constantly chafe at the lack of attention they receive for their wishes. For Rhaenyra, it's Laenor's absence in pretty much every family affair that matters, and when he does eventually turn up, it's to annoy the ever-loving shit out of her. All of her looks to him during their walk through the castle, while he says dumb shit like,
"Was it terribly painful?"
Like she wants to throw him out of the window are bad enough. It's later on, after the confrontation in the yard, when she hears him and Carl singing, that she starts reaching her limit, and she gives the servant this initial look, which becomes sheer rage after Laenor goes off for a few minutes about fighting in the Stepstones. Not that it's really his fault, it's society's, but perhaps if Laenor had been more visibly present at Rhaenyra and the boys' side, the rumours about their parentage would be a bit quieter. But there's no running from it now, and they need to stand together to face the music. Rhaenys faces a different trouble with the elder Velaryon brothers, that of their
insatiable pride.
This look she gives Corlys is clear. She blames him for associating them with this generation of Targaryens, placing both Laena and Laenor in the mouth of the dragon, all to serve his ambition to put his family on the throne. She warned him as much, and now one of them is dead. When Vaemond points out how Corlys' recklessness and Rhaenyra's adultery have undermined their house, Rhaenys can't even tell him he's wrong. She just looks away, having long since decided to avoid any future conflicts that could put her grandchildren in danger. The tears in her eyes tell how she's reminded of everyone she's already lost, a number that may soon include Corlys, but also frustration that now Vaemond's ambition is dragging them into yet another confrontation.
Heedless ambition has always been a Velaryon weakness.
In the end, she doesn't have a choice. When Viserys steps in to stop the Green's machinations, she's forced to choose a side and ultimately goes with Rhaenyra. I adore this shot so much, not only for its beauty, the out-of-focus candles surrounding Rhaenys symbolizing the looming danger of her choice, but also Rhaenys' dead, resigned look. So many have already died, and now they'll continue dying, and she's forced to go along with it. Finally, she confronts Corlys when he wakes up. He's decided to devote himself to the family that he ran away from more than once to pursue his wars in the Stepstones, and starts this grand speech about how they're done taking sides and pursuing the throne. Throughout it all, Rhaenys looks at him without any sympathy, knowing that there's no getting what she wanted now. It's too late, and for them to protect their family, they'll need to join the Blacks in the war to come. It's a parallel of the scene between Laenor and Rhaenyra, where again the Velaryon lad has realized his folly too late, and is shut down by his Targaryen princess. It's no coincidence that after this, Rhaenys finally seems to respect Rhaenyra. They're aligned out of necessity, but aligned nonetheless. And after a couple of blips like Daemon saying that the Blacks have Meleys, which Rhaenys responds to with a look like, "Excuse me, did you just say we?" She's got Rhaenyra's back completely. I love the sass in this look she gives Rhaenyra as she walks away after backing her in the petition. More than just the fact of their alliance through marriage, Rhaenys respects Rhaenyra's hesitation to jump immediately into battle and assassination, which Daemon and most of the Greens are more than happy to do. Rhaenyra and Alicent become essentially the last people holding the country back from all-out war, though they're constantly undermined from within, with Alicent's disbelief that the small council were already planning a coup, regardless of what she said about Vizzy's last words, and everyone's awkward looks around the table while Daemon makes his war plans and Rhaenyra screams in the background. But they do temporarily regain control, with Alicent getting hold of Aegon first and Rhaenyra being crowned on Dragonstone. When Rhaenyra's crowned, I think Rhaenys looks genuinely proud. Maybe it's pride in seeing a queen, regardless of which queen in particular, but I don't think it's that. After all their enmity, Rhaenyra looks so surprised to have a win when the Velaryons swear for her, tell her about holding the Stepstones and Meleys will patrol for them, and Rhaenys gives her a look like, "Go get him, girlfriend." When Daemon and Otto are about to butt heads and Rhaenyra looks lost in thought over Alicent's page, Syrax begins roaring and she looks up at her. It reminds her that she's a dragon, and she's the one with the power to take control of this situation and steer everyone towards peace. She's always had that instinct within her, ever since she encountered the White Hart in the Kingswood. Rather than kill it and claim it as a symbol of her legitimacy, she would rather let it live and run free and admire it from afar. But nothing lasts forever, and certainly not peace in Westeros. Perhaps in an alternate world where both boys had better control of their dragons, things might have been different, and Rhaenyra could have accepted terms with Alicent. Daemon wouldn't have been happy, and neither will have a fair number of lords, but all-out war might have been avoided. When Luke is murdered though, Rhaenyra's peaceful intent dies with him. Again, this has always been her nature. She let the peaceful White Hart run free, but when the boar attacked her, she savagely stabbed it to death. Otto and the Greens had already woken the dragon with their coup, and the loss of Visenya was hard enough on her. Losing another child, and at the hand of the Greens no less, is the final straw for Rhaenyra. She turns and looks directly at the camera with the ultimate look to kill. No compassion or love, only hatred and single-minded vengeance. Rhaenyra is done with Restraint. War is coming. I can't think of any better way to end a show about meaningful looks than with one badass motherfucking look. Thanks very much for watching, folks. This is part 1 of 2, and the second will be out very shortly, so remember to subscribe and tune in for the conclusion. This was supposed to be one massive 2.5-hour video, but HBO and YouTube just completely blocked it. Surprisingly though, splitting it into chunks and not editing anything else about it means that it is postable for some reason. I don't get how or why that works, but hey, I've spent too long on this thing and already lost another hour-long video to copyright in the past, so I really don't want this to go to waste. I've recorded a wee intro to the next part, but if the pacing and editing feels off, that'll be why. But if you like how this part is going so far, I don't know if you know about this, but there's a button that you can press to indicate your satisfaction, and get this, you can even put it into words using this thing called a comment. I know, right? Crazy world we live in.
Wonderful.